走动。第二，不能大声喧哗，专注我们的会议内容，避免交头接耳。三，会议期间如果有特殊情况，随时可以找我们的工作人员进行反馈。感谢大家的光临，谢谢。
good morning
for those
and a very good morning
watching us live
for those
from the United Kingdom,
watching us live from the United Kingdom and Europe,
we
as
are
well as
live
the
from
Middle East.
Pizhou,
We are live from
the beating heart
Pizhou,
of China's plywood
the
industry.
beating heart of China's plywood
Today,
industry.
We celebrate a true
Today,
milestone.
we celebrate
The
a true
First
milestone.
Global Plywood Forum.
The first Global Plywood Forum
Innovations.
hosted by Tribeca Innovations.
George Chu,
I'm your host,
founders of Tribeca
George Chu,
Innovations.
founders of
We are
Tribeca
a New
Innovations.
York-based
We are a New York-based
consulting firm.
business transformation
Partners
consulting
with
firm.
forward-thinking
We
companies
partners with forward-thinking companies like RILICO and Panda Panels.
navigate market
We
shifts,
help them navigate market shifts,
technology,
apply cutting-edge technology,
built on
and
integrity.
build brands built on integrity.
Today, we focus on
Today, we
the
focus on
foundational
plywood,
panels that
the
underpin
foundational
everything
panels
around us.
that underpins everything around us.
Hospital,
From homes,
data centers,
Hospital,
and bridges around
data
us.
center, and bridges around the globe.
Plywood sits exactly
Plywood sits exactly where policy meets production.
meets
Certifications meets construction.
meets scale.
And sustainability
And now
meets scale.
everything is being
And now everything is
by
being
new
redefined
regulations, by more
by
savvy
new
buyers,
regulations,
and
by more savvy buyers,
digital traceability.
and by digital traceability. You
Why
must be
now?
thinking,
Because
why now?
volume and
Because
price alone
volume
no longer
and
secure
price
contracts.
alone no longer secure
Trust.
contracts.
Value
Trust
and accountability
Value
are the new
and
currency.
accountability are the new
And that
currency.
transformation is precisely
And that
what
transformation
we're covering.
is precisely what we'll be covering
Joining
today.
me today to navigate this
Joining
journey
me today
are two
to navigate this
industry
journey
visionaries.
are two industry
Please
visionaries.
welcome
Jeff Wang, Executive Chairman of RILICO, a company with a 45 years legacy. Under Jeff's leadership, RILICO have reinvented itself as a technology-driven, internationally certified powerhouse of plywood, setting the global standards for quality and compliance. Please welcome Jeff. Also,
Christopher Williams,
welcome
founder
Christopher Williams,
Panel.
founder with over 56 years in the timber and plywood business. Chris established Panda 22 years ago and was the first agent to sell Chinese plywood to the UK market. Over the years, Panda's meticulous sourcing and due diligence in Europe and Asia have set the new standard for transparent trade in the industry. Please welcome Christopher Williams. Welcome, Christopher Williams. And over the next hour, we will move from macro policy shift to micro level of ability to counter, from evolving regulations to real world great opportunity.
Welcome to Pizhou.
So,
welcome
to Pizhou. Welcome to transformation. Let's begin. Welcome again. Chris, let's start with the headline issues. Anti-dumping measure, European Union deforestation regulation, also known as EUDR, and rising expectations from buyers in the EU. What are you seeing in the United Kingdom as well as European markets?
Thanks, George. The short version, a lot of importers are suddenly wide awake. Even though the UK left the EU, many UK importers either have branches in the EU or serve EU customers. and those customers are now demanding full EUDR compliance. The new provisional anti-dumping regulation, effective from July the 10th, scheduled to become law in November 2025, is already disrupting Chinese plywood manufacturers. One of the workarounds we're seeing is the shift to hardwood plywood core with softwood faces, with poplar or eucalyptus core under coniferous veneers. Why? Because of EU tariff. Headings are based on the face and back species, not the core. However, this is now being closely observed by the EU Commission. Brussels will eventually close that loophole. In the meantime, buyers are scrambling to avoid being caught in non-compliance.
Thank you, Chris. Jeff, from RILICO's perspective, how are you seeing this evolving?
Sorry. Thank you, George. We actually
these developments. For us, this is the best time to enter the UK and the EU market because we're doing so with full compliance from the ground up. RILICO doesn't have to rework the old systems. We built our entire supply chain with EUDR, FSC, PEFC, CE, UKCA, and traceability in mind. For example, we use a particle-based tracing system that we created ourselves. Every RILICO plastic panel we produce can be tracked back to its source by its production date, production condition, species, origin, and lots. Our clients can verify compliance in real time, all the way down to each individual panel. We're currently trying to adopt similar tracking system for commercial plywood to the EU and the UK market. Thank you.
That's truly a huge operational advantage. Very impressive, Jeff. Now, Chris, do you see buyers responding to this type of traceability?
Thanks, George. Yes, but the learning curve has been very steep. Historically, many UK buyers have placed too much trust in the come from export agents. I can count how many times we've been told this factory has CE and FSC certification, then we find out when the plywood was subcontracted to another mill with no mill certification. We've had to adapt. Now, unless we personally visited the mill and confirm chain of custody on site and seen a complete set of EUDR documents, we won't proceed.
Thank you, Chris. Now, Jeff, can you speak more about how RILICO handles certifications?
Certainly, George. I'd like to take your attention now to the screen behind us. Currently, at RILICO, we hold the following: FSC, PEFC, CE, UKCA, ISO 9001. We're GFA audited, we're SMETA audited, and of course, we're now fully aligned with EUDR traceability requirements. And we've gone one step further. We've integrated these systems with our in-house tech team to ensure automated traceability. We can trace back to any irregularity and resolve it before the goods even leave the factory.
Wow. What a remarkable resume of certifications. Over to you, Chris. What about Panda Panels?
Thanks, George. We're similarly thorough. Panda Panels holds FSC, PEFC, ISO 9001, ISO 14001, and we're members of the International Trade Council. These aren't just for show. We actively verify every step of the sourcing process. That includes registering our trademark with Chinese customs to prevent counterfeit shipments using our name.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Jeff. As we have heard in this segment, we've seen that true compliance driven by end-to-end traceability and built-in certifications. These are no longer optionals. but definitely a competitive edge. And welcome back. Now let's move into the next segment, where we talk about market legacy, brand integrity. In this segment, we will explore how transparency and trust define the brand in the evolving landscape. Chris, we start with you again. How has the market changed over the past 2 decades?
Thanks once again, George. It's been a journey. In the early 2000s, UK buyers would tolerate all kinds of inconsistency. We could order mixed thicknesses from one supplier and receive 3 different mills productions. No questions were asked. There was no CE requirements, almost no interest in FSC or PEFC, and EUDR was unheard of. Today, that's no longer acceptable. Buyers want consistency, traceability, and transparency. They want to know who produced it, under what standards, and can it be verified.
Right. Seems like buyers are getting more and more sophisticated. Now, to you, Jeff, what's your take on this?
Thanks, George.
Hello? There you go. Thanks, George. That actually resonates with us. In our earlier days, RILICO was also partly operating as a trade. Our clients wanted a full range of materials, so we have to partner out with different groups to get it done. That work in places like the Middle East, where compliance isn't as critical. But in the UK and the EU, we know
So we invested in ourselves to become
to become a vertically integrated producer. From log procurement to finished panel. Everything is under one system, one standard that RILICO controls.
That's really insightful.
Thanks, Jeff. That's really insightful.
Responsibility.
And with that comes brand responsibility.
Chris, tell us
To
a
you,
little
Jeff.
bit more
To you,
about the
Chris.
challenges of brand
Tell us a little bit more about the challenges of brand imitation.
Thanks, George. It's a constant battle. Mexico, Vietnam, and even the US, products we have never even touched as a company. So we registered the copyright of our logo and worked with Chinese customs to prevent unauthorised exports. Given our experience, it's not enough to chase every counterfeit. The better strategy now is to make your systems, your service, and your quality impossible to fake. The buyers don't want stories, they want certainty. If you can't provide it, you're off the list.
I couldn't agree with you more, Chris. Jeff, now to you. What about RILICO's on brand imitations?
Thank you, George. Yes, we've actually faced the same challenges. Our GT brand has been imitated at least 10 times across the Middle East. And we've even seen these imitations going into the North Africa regions. We've won legal battles. We've successfully seized goods at the customs. But now, instead of fighting every counterfeit, we're investing in innovation and brand awareness. It is harder to copy excellence than to copy a logo. We've had competitors imitating our brands, and ironically, even clients in the market doing the same. Here are some examples on the screen. At one point, we documented over 10 imitations to our GT brand. That's when we decided to shift our focus to technology-driven differentiation. You can't fake an automated tracking system and product quality, which we don't just provide it. We use it as a foundation to build long-term buyer confidence.
Thank you, Jeff.
It's great to see now that we have moved
It's
from
plain
a
to say
time
now
with
that
inconsistency
we have moved from a time when inconsistency are tolerated to now a market that demands consistency, traceability, as well as accountability.
True brand power.
We have also learned that true brand power comes from traceability again, IP protection, and relentless quality.
Make your brand.
It seems like the goal is the same. Make your brand
Now
impossible.
with brand integrity as our safeguard,
Now with brand integrity as our safeguard,
where we talk
we can
about
advance to the next segment, where we talk about the shift from volume to value,
and differentiate
and explore how innovations and differentiated offering drive the next level of competitiveness.
Welcome back.
Again, we've heard a lot today about compliance and trust, but I want to shift things a little bit to something equally transformative. The move from high volume to high value. We start with you, Jeff. How has this shift shaped RILICO's strategic directions?
Thank you, George. Yes, this is a critical evolution. And let me start by saying this. China is no longer the cheapest manufacturing hub. Today, countries like Vietnam, Uganda, and Tanzania have significantly lower costs in terms of raw materials and labor. So for companies that manufacturing out of China, the question becomes, how do we remain competitive without racing to the bottom on price? Vietnam, for instance, is increasingly positioning itself as a low-cost alternative to China. But the problem is, they're not yet able to prove EUDR compliance in a credible way. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Another eye-opening insight. Thank you. What's your take on Vietnam, Chris?
Thanks, George. We've seen the same, I'll admit. Vietnam is improving quickly and there's real potential there. But for now, they haven't crossed the compliance threshold needed to seriously compete in regulated markets like the UK and the EU. And remember, Vietnamese plywood is duty-free into the EU and the UK thanks to trade agreements. That gives them a 6% advantage over Chinese exports, notwithstanding the 62.4% anti-dumping duty. But that benefit is largely offset by high freight rates from Vietnamese ports, and especially by their lack of traceability infrastructure. India is also interesting. They've got a huge domestic market and aren't overly focused on exports. The few that have approached us haven't yet been able to meet European compliance standards.
Well, we have Vietnam, Uganda, India. It seems that many competitions are popping up left and right. How do you stay competitive, Jeff?
Thanks, George. And the answer for RILICO is simple. We don't just compete on price, we compete through innovation. We've invested significantly in high-end machineries from Europe, and we've also scaled up our human resource and experienced talents to improve overall quality. It's no longer just about quantity, it's about how efficiently and reliably we can meet a client's specific requirement. And it's important to say, we don't see made in China as a limitation anymore. Our aim is for people to say, that's RILICO, and to know exactly what that means, regardless of where we're based.
That's a major breakthrough. Chris, to you, can you give us a sense of how innovation is being received by buyers in the UK and the EU?
When I first visited China for plywood in the early 2000s, most mills were family-owned, labour-intensive and very poorly ventilated. Health and safety are non-existent. What we're seeing now from leading companies like RILICO is a complete transformation. Modern, mechanised, audit-ready factories. You'd be surprised how few countries can actually match that today. That's something buyers are starting to recognise too, more clearly. There was a time when everyone assumed Chinese plywood was just a low-cost, mass-market product. But over the past few years, we've seen companies like RILICO redefining what that looks like, moving from just supplying panels to delivering high-cost performance ratio, true value for many. One of the key accounts we're actually working with at the moment, a major European DIY retailer, has some of the most demanding procurement standards we have ever encountered. For example, we're talking about detailed sustainability documentation, worker health and safety audits, formaldehyde and emission testing, all before they even consider an order. RILICO passed every criterion, and that's not common. Most would fail at the first documentation alone. And let me add, one of the reasons we were able to get the business in the first place was because the supplier we were working with was willing to build customer specification. That's the kind of flexibility not standard in the Chinese plywood industry, and it's where RILICO really stand out.
Thank you, Chris. It seems that buyers are getting more and more savvy and definitely more demanding. Now, let's shift from the lens of a supplier. Jeff, to you, can you share with us RILICO's take on this?
Sure, thank you, George. This project has been a turning point for us. It shows that clients now evaluate performance over the entire life cycle, not just the initial invoice. Reusability, safety, sustainability, and loading efficiency now sit side by side with price in any serious tender. We also learned early that trying to sell what the mill wants to sell instead of what the buyer wants just doesn't work anymore. This is why RILICO integrated to produce exact specifications on demand. You see, innovations isn't just about tech. It's about mindset and about being proactive instead of reactive. Thank you.
Again, I'm truly impressed by RILICO. Thank you, Jeff. Chris, to you, would you like to elaborate anything on this?
Yes, George. Yes, George. And it's not just the case with UK's biggest DIY retailer. We've also won the trust of companies we previously tried to source from Malaysia and Indonesia, but those suppliers were unable or unwilling to customise. That opened the door for us, and that's how to go from volume to value.
Thank you, Chris. Ladies and gentlemen, we have learned in this segment that true value comes from innovations, customizations, and performance over the life cycle of a product. Now let's turn to the next segment to uncover how emerging markets and strategic partnership will shape the future of the plywood industry. Welcome back. As we enter our final segment, let's zoom out a little bit and widen the lens. Let's look at the global landscape and strategic positioning, because both invite us to look at things ahead at the macro level, macro forces, emerging regions, and great decisions that you have to make. That would define the plywood industry for the years to come. We start with you, Chris. On the global picture, what pressure and patterns are you seeing?
Thanks, George. We're seeing a new kind of buyer emerge, one that demands value backed by verification. For example, in Southeast Asia, Indonesia and Malaysia are moving into high-value exports, but it's not without risk. some mills are offering now birch plywood allegedly made with imported veneers from Latvia without verification documents. That's dangerous. Most of the EUDR, we've seen multiple red flags, products that can't be validated by any third-party chain of custody.
Thank you, Chris. And that raises a critical point about verifications. Jeff, to you, how does RILICO plan to differentiate itself among these blurring lines?
Thanks, George. At RILICO, we believe differentiation comes from consistency and control. In the Gulf states, for example, Vision 2030 in Saudi Arabia are pushing for massive infrastructure projects. But that also drives demand for recycle-grade, inconsistent, and untraceable plywood. We understand that cost matters, but it should not be at the expense of performance or compliance. Unfortunately, not everyone else sees it the same way. And because of that, the market perceives Chinese product as low grade and low cost. But we don't just want to be seen as a Chinese plywood supplier. We want to be recognized globally as a trusted plywood manufacturer of world-class standard. So quality control and service consistency are what sets us apart. We benchmark ourselves against firms like Sveza of Russia and UPM of Finland, and we're building towards that level every day. Yes,
Made in China carries some bias in the plywood industry.
made in China carries some bias in the plywood
When you
industry.
buy an iPhone,
But let me ask
think
you
of it
this.
as premium American
When you
product.
buy an iPhone,
Even though it's
you think of it as a premium American product.
Why?
Even though it's being assembled here in China.
Because it's the brand
Why?
that carries the trust.
Because it's the brand
That's where we're going
that
here.
carries the trust.
We're not just
And that's
selling.
where we're going with RILICO.
We're selling
We're
reliability,
not just selling panels.
engineered by
We're
system,
selling reliability,
technology, and traceability.
engineered by system, technology, and traceability. Thank you.
This is truly remarkable.
Thank you, Jeff.
Now let's go back
This
to
is
the market
truly
dynamics.
remarkable.
Chris,
Now let's go back to market dynamics.
some traditional exporting
Start with you too.
have faded in this
Some traditional exporting regions have faded in visibility.
Thanks, George.
What's your point of view?
Again, thanks, George. Absolutely. Regions like Taiwan, the Philippines, Singapore once played a big role in plywood exports, but today they're growing massively. Why? They didn't adapt to growing demands for traceability, sustainability, and regulatory compliance. There are policy implications as well. Taiwan and Singapore plywood industry declined as a direct result of Indonesia imposing an export ban on logs to encourage the production of plywood actually in Indonesia. I always remember that Singapore discouraged the expansion of their plywood industry on the other hand of Vietnam shows great potential. But on the other hand, Vietnam shows great potential, but only if they bring the compliance documentation. As mentioned earlier, we've been approached by Vietnamese producers, and so far, very few have provided credible EUDR compliance documents. There's opportunity, but there's also a very steep learning curve.
So, with all these moving
Thank you,
parts,
Chris.
Jeff,
So, with all these moving parts,
you say
Jeff,
competitive.
how are you positioning RILICO
Thank you,
to
George.
stay competitive?
We're evolving from a product mindset to a
We're
brand
evolving
mindset.
from a product
Our
mindset
goal is
to a brand and systems mindset.
Our
They
goal is
know
simple.
exactly what
When
it
buyer
stands
sees
for,
RILICO,
of origin.
they know exactly what it
That takes
stands
more than
for,
quality
regardless
control.
of origin.
It requires company
That takes more than quality control.
investment in
It
technology,
requires company-wide alignment,
understanding.
investment in
That's
technology,
what we need.
and a deep understanding
We're
of
also
what
shifting
buyers really
from
need.
reactive to client-specific.
We're also shifting
optimization.
from reactive to
What Chris said
client-specific
about buyers
customization.
wanting plywood.
What Chris said earlier
Exactly.
about buyers wanting plywood that
That's
fits
our
their
reality.
exact specifications.
And we totally.
That's our reality, and we totally embrace it.
That's a powerful vision.
Thank you, Jeff.
Now, ladies and
That's a
gentlemen,
powerful
pay
vision.
attention
Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's turn attention to shared directions. I now invite Jeff Wang from RILICO and Christopher Williams of Panda Panels to sign a partnership agreement to which Panda will represent RILICO in the UK and EU markets. And ladies and gentlemen, this is more than symbolic. This is a working agreement to uphold traceability, brand accountability, and buyer transparency. Precisely what we have covered today. And also as a partnership pillar of how we all will move forward together. Congratulations. Congratulations.
What a historic moment we just witnessed.
What a historic moment
I believe
that we just witnessed.
RILICO has one final
Now, Jeff, I believe RILICO has one final announcement.
Yes, that's right. Today, I'm
Thank you,
delighted
Lord.
to introduce
Yes, that's right.
our foray of
Today, I'm delighted to introduce
We've taken our
our
patented
range of
plywood
formwork system.
and combined
We've taken our patented plastic plywood and combined it with a modular construction system
reusability,
designed to reduce labor,
efficiency,
increase reusability, and improve job site efficiency, especially for large-scale contractors.
in-house research.
This is the result of years of in-house research and development.
But to reflect,
It's built not just on performance, but to reflect the kind of engineering trust
with
we've
Forage,
been talking about
we're not
today.
just offering a product.
With
We're
Forage,
offering an integrated
we're not just
solution
offering a
for the
product.
next era.
We're offering an integrated solution for the next era of
A
smart
new product
construction.
born from an innovative mindset.
A new product born from an innovative mindset
And now,
and market
I'd like to
evolution.
invite our CTO on stage.
And
to
now,
walk through the key
I'd like to
innovations
invite our
behind
CTO on
Forage's
stage
formwork system.
to walk through the key innovations behind Forage formwork system.
尊敬的各位国际友人，各位来，尊敬的各位国际友人，各位来宾，各位业界亲戚们，大家下午好。非常感谢大家百忙之中抽出时间来参加本次会议。现在，请允许我向大家隆重推出我们莱亚集团的全新产品——莱亚零方木制模体系。
我们这套全新的制模方案是
顾名思义，我们这套全新的制模方案是不需要方木的。
传统的钢带木体量，
目前在中国市场，传统的钢带木体量还是非常大的。但是传统的钢带木也有很多痛点，比如第一点，功能单一，灵活性低，
超不过
导致总体替代率
方木损耗还是
超不过50%。
第二，
方木损耗还是非常大的。第二，
推打容易变形，
强度低，导致整理打包修复等成本过高。第三，耐腐蚀性差，容易生锈，后期需要不断的投入打磨、刷漆等维护成本，并且生锈后会减轻重量、降低强度，导致这个财产贬值，并增加了施工安全的风险。第四，重量太重，导致工人搬运过程效率低，劳动强度大，同时转场的运输成本也很高。然后传统木模等模板和方木使用完成后，拔钉整理的成本很高，残值呢也非常的低，甚至有些地方没有这个成熟的模板、废旧模板和这个方木的处理产业链的， 他还需要花钱去请别人来帮他处理这些废旧的模板和方木。基于以上的行业痛点，我们南亚集团历17年，经过反复的实验，不断的打磨改进，直至今天，以上的行业痛点，我们已经全部解决。首先，我们采用的是 Q1380超强方钢，屈服强度、抗压强度、抗拉强度均超过1380兆帕，落实硬度更是达到了45级以上。市场上普通的方管基本上都是 Q235的，落实硬度也只有5级。我们产品的指标基本上都是在他们普通的管子5倍以上，所以我们的产品具有强度高、重量轻、不容易变形的优势，并自带抗腐蚀功能，大大的降低了人工、运输、维护等成本。同时，通过我们研发的开孔设计，又在它强大的基础上增加了通用功能，并且还把模板的残余价值应用到了极致。我们通过管子开孔，用1.8公分的螺丝钉把管子和旧管条子连接在一起，让超强钢管完全具备方木的功能。下面我来跟大家介绍一下我们这个一管通的我们这个零方木制模的应用场景。首先，第一是我们的梁，我们的梁底可以采用带板条子的管子，跟传统的钉梁底的方式一样，用钉子去钉。这样的话还是需要拔钉子啊，也可以直接用方管从下面往上面打螺丝钉，这样的话就不需要拔钉子了。像我们下面那个图片一样，以后拆模就不需要拔钉子了。第二，梁帮上口用带板条的方管，中间和下面可以用那种带板条的、不带板条的都可以。两种都需用螺丝和钉子用，都需用螺丝，两种都不需要拔钉子，上螺丝都可以更加的稳当。两种都不需要拔钉子，上螺丝会更加的稳当。用带板条的方法。第三，梁板拼缝的位置用带板条的方法，都采用梁上口和这个拼缝的这个方管都采用3.5公分的钉子，长角处。强柱仰角是墙角处，如果重复强柱仰角和土头，如果重复使用次数多，我们就采用3048的管子；如果重复使用回形卡拼接，如果重复使用的管少，就采用直接拼装。带板条的管子用3.5公分的螺丝钉直接拼装。那两个就是我们的意思图。拼缝数和钉角数均采用。方管加拼缝数和钉角数均采用方管加6.3公分的螺丝钉即可。我们这个左边是一个硬角的方钢银角连接模板，右边的是用于拼缝，它完全可以代替方管挂在墙梁柱上面的时候，方管挂在墙梁柱上面的时候，用一枚螺丝钉或者螺丝铁钉即可。以前我们画这个方管和那个圆管，它是需要钉一根钉子，然后用杂丝去钉，过来手块也大，也比较费工。我们现在直接装上去，然后我们两种管子各有6种型号，分别是我们两种管子各有6种型号，分别是0.5米、1米、1.5米、2米和3米。接长和调节尺寸，我们还为管子配了一个外接头，用于接长和调节尺寸。可以接管，也可以接带板条的管，还可以用于阴角和仰角的加固连接。可以适用于任何6种型号制模，配上我们的外套，可以适用于任何尺寸的制模，完全取代方木。我们南亚零方木制模体系完全可以解决传统。我们南亚零方木制模体系完全可以解决传统的制模的各种痛点，真正的实现降本增效。并且还大幅的提升质量。
同时也具有很大的人文
具
价值，
有很高的经济价值，
让工人
同时也具有很大的人文价值，
让我们的施
让工
工环境
人干活更体面、更轻松，让我们的施工环境
更是具备
更
很深
整洁、更美
的社
观，
会价值，减少我们
更是具备很深的社会价值，
减少炼钢量，
减少我们的建筑垃圾、
碳排放，
减少炼钢量和地数等碳排放，
真正的实现节能
大
环保
幅度的。降低木材损耗，
所谓绿水
真正
青山，
的实现节能环保。
我们南亚
所谓
人方面
绿水青山，就是
体系
青山银
的口号是
山。
建设一个项目少砍一片森林
中国。体系的口号是建设一个项目少砍一片森林。谢谢大家。
Ladies and gentlemen, as we close the first ever
Ladies and gentlemen,
forum,
as we close the first ever
let's take a moment to
Global
reflect.
Forum
What will you have seen today?
let's take a moment to reflect. What you have seen today are not just evolutions, but alignment.
Between
Alignment between buyers and producers, between regulations and innovations, and between the demand
of the future.
of the present and
This is the
opportunity
landmark moment
of the
for the
future.
Chinese plywood industry. Not
This is
just
the
to
landmark moment
compete
for the
globally,
Chinese plywood industry,
but to
not
innovate
just
to
to
win.
compete
Thank you,
globally,
everyone.
but to innovate to win. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Chris.
everyone.
DJ. Thank you, everyone.